Hello and welcome. Welcome to our yearly discussion panel. And this year we have 4 panelists that I will now introduce shortly, and we will be discussing for about an hour. I hope that at least some of the panelists will join the Slack channel later on. So if you have any questions would like to discuss with them, then please join the main pink room or channel on Slack. And on the panel today, we have Mel Lang. Mel is currently VP Operations Agile Coach at Koa Health, and she coaches the organization toward even more effectiveness and strives for continuous improvement. Mel has been a speaker on previous editions of this conference last year, talking about coaching during lockdown. We have Michael Kasprzak, who had just had his talk like an hour ago, tech product expert and entrepreneur with more than a decade of varied experience, both in startups and large organizations. Currently a CPO at Bosti, a fintech startup, which he talked about at length during his talk. We have JB Reinsberger, who tries to help programmers work with less stress, which usually leads to tackling wider issues in software development organizations. He's an old extreme programming dude, but uses XP as a guidebook and not as a rule book. This should tell you a lot about JB. And we have Daniel Terhorst North, who is the originator of behavior-driven development and deliberate discovery, just a blimp apart of more than 30 years of his experience in IT. He finds simple, pragmatic solutions to business and technical problems, often using lean and agile techniques. And we start our discussion with this question: has Agile helped products, organizations adapt to change? And we had this massive change that caused, among other things, the fact that we are not on stage in Warsaw right now, but in front of cameras in our homes. So last year brought massive change. And I wonder, what are your thoughts about Agile? Has Agile proven itself? Because one of the selling points of Agile was that it helps you adapt to change, helps you empirically tackle change and be more successful when there is change going on. Mel, what is your take on this?
Sorry, I was muted. It's kind of a recap of what I was talking about last year, but what happened last year was we went from everyone being in the office to the next day or next week, and still now not. And in terms of how the teams were working and how we were getting things done, we didn't really skip a beat. So we kept doing what we normally do. So I guess in a way that's okay. But I think what I've learned and what the organization has learned 18 months later is that we miss the spontaneity and just like, the spontaneity of connection and the random, non-intentional synchronicities that happen when you're in an office together. And that is a thing that I'm still trying to wrap my head around and still struggling to regain. So, in terms of releasing and doing feature development and being aligned and getting the product out and all of the work getting done, yeah, that's like everything that we had already set up in terms of how the teams collaborate together, do their dailies, retrospect, do their planning. That didn't change. It stayed the same, might have even improved for some teams, but we're missing the spontaneity.
Yeah, one thing that I've noticed, and especially as an old extreme programming person, it's been a bit validating. We had a bunch of things that we got used to taken away from us. And one of the things that caused us, one of the consequences of that, was that we really had to connect more deeply with what is essential in how we communicate with each other and how we perform our work. Because a bunch of things that we were used to having went away. And so as an extreme programming person, from the past, one of the things that validates me is the idea of what's the least we can do and still produce great results. And in a lot of cases, we had to figure that out in a way that we were allowed to sweep under the carpet for a long, long time. And I found that good. I found that helpful. I found that personally validating, a little bit vindicating. While at the same time, what Mel just talked about is exactly the same thing that I noticed that really stood out, was that although we could collaborate fairly well, and I think successfully enough, I think we can, I find that, you know, connecting with people over a screen isn't as hard for me as maybe it is for some other people. So in that sense, I didn't notice a huge difference that way. But the spontaneity part, the accidental stuff, that I still have no idea how to get that back. And I notice it especially in the context of, say, training classes, where in the past you would wander around and you would overhear conversations. The whole expert in earshot pattern, that has completely disappeared. I don't know how to get that back yet. And so on balance, I would say, purely for me, it's been a net win. I think more good things have happened than bad things, but it'd be very easy for me to underestimate the value of the things that we've lost. And it would be very easy to be guilty of just not noticing that, because it's like everything else, right? When it's invisible profit, you don't notice it by definition. And it's very easy to underestimate how much of that there was. Funnily enough, I don't think we're going to find out, because there's going to be a lot of pressure over the next 18 months to 3 years to go back to the old way of doing things. And during that period, we're probably going to accidentally get some of that stuff back. And I'm curious to see how much of what we've learned about being minimal, about what's the least we can do and still produce good results. I'm worried that not a lot of that is going to stick around 5 years from now. And that this will all have been you know, for some people a bad dream, even though for us, I think it's actually been, on the whole, kind of a nice thing.
Okay. Dan, I see you moving in my screen, that you want to ask if you want to say something.
I love the premise of this, because we're talking about you know, how have agile methods kind of helped us adapt to this remote, this distributed world, as though there was any element of choice in it. And I loved how Mel opened this, right? We're not working remotely. We're not working distributed. We've been wrenched out of everything we know and thrown into isolation in our homes. For the vast majority of people, I'm an independent consultant. I've been independent for about 10 years. I work at home. I'm currently sitting in my lovely home office with professional lighting and microphones and camera and a huge monitor, and I'm set up to do this. My current client that I've been working with for some years is in India. My team is distributed in Barcelona, Poland, South Africa. So, you know, this is normal for me. The fact that the world has been on fire for 18 months, yeah, sure, that's taken an emotional toll, right? But this type of working is normal for me. So I think we need to frame a few things. If we're talking about the world of developing software products or software-based products, that is generally, if Agile, little a Agile has taught us anything, it's that the best software products are built, the best software product outcomes are built by small, passionate, multifaceted, co-located human beings. And all of that, I call it serendipitous eavesdropping, that thing, where you happen to overhear something and go, hey, I've got a thought about that, or hey, you're doing that, that could totally help me. We lose a bunch of that. The other part of this is the idea of Agile itself, right? Is when I hear these kind of conversations, and I want to make sure, I want to really try and make sure that we don't kind of fall into the same trap in this panel. Agile kind of becomes a cipher for like waiting for Godot. You know, when we're Agile, all these things will happen. And before the panel went up, we were chatting, you know, sort of in the virtual green room, as it were. And about this, like this idea that, you know, Agile says that an organization can adapt to change. No, it doesn't. That was never in it. right? What Agile says is a single team, single product, software project or software bunch of people can adapt to changing requirements for whatever reasons relatively quickly compared to what else we had. That's all it offers, right? And Agile methods in general only offer single team, single product, linear delivery, right? And the reason they offer that is, and again, this stuff dates from the 90s. We're a bunch of Scrum folks will tell you that this is state of the art. This is 1992, 93. This is your grandma's Agile, right? Probably not even your mum's, your grandma's Agile. This is from back in the days when if I started a build using make on my big C++ code base, it was going to be 4 to 5 hours before I had an executable. And so, yeah, if I can do stuff in a few weeks in that context, that's pretty miraculous, right? I can now spin up thousands of servers in someone else's data center in seconds. If I'm making decisions over a period of weeks, I am being absolutely eaten alive by the likes of Michael, right? His startup is operating much, much more rapidly than that. So Agile isn't Godot, right? Agile isn't a panacea. Agile is a set of methods that are particularly good at single team, single product, directed delivery. That said, there's a bunch of tricks that we learn that are really well suited to human beings collaborating. And it turns out that a bunch of those tricks transfer reasonably well to human beings collaborating asynchronously or over Zoom or whatever else. There's a whole bunch of other tricks that don't. And to Joe's point, to JB's point, there's a whole bunch of things that we need to be really mindful that we've lost and that we're hiding in plain sight. And that as human beings, we need to measure. I want to give you some data, and then I want to hear what Michael's got to say. There was a wonderful blog post recently by Cloudflare, and Cloudflare are very, very good at operating in the clear, right, if you like, or in the open. Like they're very, very, my experience of their blog is, here's us warts and all. And they've been looking at this idea of remote working, distributed working, hybrid working, and they said, we measured it. We measured it, we asked some folks, and they noticed this, and this really surprised me. All their numbers went up, all of them. So throughput, delivery, sales, revenue, staff happiness, right? Attrition went down, employee happiness went up. And they said their biggest surprise, or the biggest thing that stood out for them, is that in meetings, in group collaboration scenarios, underrepresented people spoke up more. So women spoke more, people of color spoke more, because it's much harder to be a big alpha white guy in a room when everyone looks like the Brady Bunch. That
There's no room.
Doesn't work. And so for those of you old enough to remember the Brady Bunch, so given that, they said, sure, we want to bring people back to co-locate if they want to, but we don't want to lose that magic, because that's really special. And we want to rethink our office to somewhere that people can collaborate. So they took away meeting rooms of about 8 people, which is what meeting rooms are usually, because mostly if you're in a meeting, everyone's on Zoom anyway, right? Because half the team aren't there. So they've created loads of little pods that are all like nicely sound insulated, and you can get on and have a meeting. And then they've got big spaces where you can do big stuff, right? And they're saying that's what we're going to make our office into, and we're going to iterate. And I love that companies like that are saying, we don't know. We don't know whether we're going to be hybrid or remote or back in the office, probably not back in the office in the way we thought. We're going to see what happens.
But one could argue that if you kind of change your organization so that it's a collection of small teams with products, then it as a whole will be more resilient and more responsive to change. And that was the premise. And apart from whether that was this kind of attempts to transform, or I don't like the word transform, but to change organizations, whether they have been successful or not, and for the most part they have not been successful. So the question is, okay, because you have been very much concentrating on this workplace side, but there is the product side. So have the products really, have the companies that got better at this actually have their products adapted quicker to the change last year?
Let me address the elephant in the room, and then I'm going to shut up for a bit.
Okay, cool.
So the elephant in the Agile room is always governance, right? The element in the Agile room is And I know everyone just went, oh no, that sounds like grown-up language. I can give you governance in 2 questions. The whole of governance is 2 questions. What are we spending our money on? How's it going? That's it. That's the whole of governance. The problem is, in any non-trivial organization, we've got no idea what we're spending our money on, and we couldn't tell you even if you asked us how it's going, which is why there's then an entire industry around governance and governance tooling and governance consulting. Now, for a large, heavy, linear project, and as I say, I'm working with an Indian company at the moment. They're a telco. They built the largest 4G network in India. They laid out 200,000 masts in about 2 years, right? Insane project. They then switched it all on, and they were onboarding 1 million customers a day, right? 1 million customers a day during 2018, right? And so that is a very, very linear project. I want a Gantt chart for that. Yeah. So now when we go on to agile projects, yes, let's have loads of small teams, but you cannot have autonomy without also having alignment, without also having people pointing in the same direction. And I genuinely believe you can do that in distributed, in remote first teams, but it has to be a deliberate choice. So I call it autonomy through alignment. And I think the alignment conversation is something that a lot of agile folks, air quotes agile folks, either don't have or don't know how to have.
I really think one thing that has emerged from this whole situation, if you want to say one problem that we are starting to fix, is one particular kind of agile theater that tends to go on in organizations who want to be seen to be claiming to be agile. And that's specifically collaboration theater, right? This making a big show of facilitating collaboration, whether it happens or not, and really not caring so much about the outcome. And I think one thing that has happened in suddenly being sequestered in our homes is that some of the visual trappings, some of the conspicuous attributes of collaboration theater have disappeared from view. We don't look at them anymore. We don't see the big rooms with the big whiteboards and all the things that our, benevolent overlords have tried to give us in order to foster collaboration. And what we've got instead, and I'll beat this drum as long as you'll let me, is a whole bunch of people who have no idea how to collaborate, who have sort of split into 2 broad categories. On the one hand, you have the people who have figured out that they actually really didn't need to, they weren't really collaborating that much in the first place, so it's fine. I mean, there are like, let's not pretend we're collaborating anymore. Let's not even pretend that we're trying to collaborate anymore. Let's admit that what we've effectively done is congregated 8 people working in the same product, in the same code base, in the same file sharing folder, whatever it is, but each one doing their own thing and then being forced to come together once a day and awkwardly share how it's going. But that no actual risk management has been taking place, no actual collaboration has been taking place. It's just a bunch of people in the same place working on roughly the same things around the same time. And to me, that's good news. I don't want to try to impose false collaboration on people who find a way to live without it. Now, the other category, the other group of people, are the people who have genuinely realized we actually do care about collaborating. We actually do want to work together. We actually do need to coordinate closely. We actually do want to do things like ensemble programming or, 4 people at a whiteboard together. And, I'm just gonna say, holy shit, we have to figure out how to do it. They're the ones who have adopted the kind of agile mindset, phrase I don't like, that we think we've been pushing for 25 years, which is, what do we actually need? What is the simplest thing that will help us do it? And then let's actually do it, as opposed to the agile theater, collaboration theater. So that, I think that's been really a huge win, is that there are a bunch of organizations who have had to give up the notion that they instead of wanting to be seen as trying to collaborate, They've just recognized, look, we actually are a bunch of individuals working on a similar project, and that's kind of okay. When collaboration becomes truly valuable to us, then we will do the hard work of figuring out how to make it happen in this difficult environment, or we'll just hunker down, wait for this to be over, and then we can get back to the office. Maybe we'll do that weird extreme programming thing where you figure out what you actually need and then figure out the simplest way to get it, as opposed to this collaboration theater. And I couldn't be happier. I think for me, the biggest win from this has been the number of people who can now say, oh, we no longer have to pretend that we care about collaborating. Isn't this great? Because they were never going to do it in the first place. More power to them. For the rest of them who really need to learn how to collaborate in this environment, I would like to help you figure out how to do that. And I'm sure a lot of my colleagues would like to also help you figure out how to do that. And it's not as expensive as you think.
Listening to what you all of you mentioned, I think one thing that comes to my mind is the question would have to be somehow should land in a context, because the context of what problem are they solving, what is the at what stage in the life cycle of the product or service are they? Like in telecom, I worked in telecom, as Dan mentioned. Like it sounds like a never-ending story. There's no end and no beginning and no end. It's like I was in 2G, 3G, 4G, 5G, and it was like, oh my God, we always have legacy of so many people. What are we doing? So if we look at how has Agile helped in that manner, I'd say if we look at the delivery side, so let's say the execution, most teams, if you know what you have to do, they know what to do. They just go and do the stuff. If I look at that, my company, for example, now it started in the middle of COVID, kind of, right? I was in Australia. My co-founder was in Poland. I never met the people I worked with when we didn't even have a name for our company when we started doing the research. So they somehow trusted me online. And then we realized that in the beginning, everyone was, oh, I'm at home, I can do my stuff. It's really cool. And then what you, Mel, mentioned and Daniel, this like creating new things is like a contact sport, like this unexpected discussions over a coffee, it might pivot the direction. And the agility we would look for, like, oh, let's take the opportunity of pursuing some direction that we suddenly discovered. Let's just test it out and see what happens. It has disappeared. And what I've observed is that people who first wanted to go remote, they were really happy and satisfied. Like you, Daniel, have a perfect working spot. One of my tech leads says, like, no one has a perfect place like I do at home. I for half a year, I was renovating one room to have it so perfect, right? And then this guy one day says, hey, when can we go back to the office? Or can we meet at least once a week somehow? Anyhow, I can travel half of Europe. I just want to meet you guys because I have so many things to say, so many ideas, and we just need to work it through. So if I look at from that perspective, the promises, as Andy, you mentioned, it's like, yeah, if we have the interactions between people, they might have a chance to find better ways of doing things. But if they just have one person pushing tasks down people's throats, they can get productive. But the question I look from a product management perspective is like, are we building the right thing? Are we validating fast? Do we get feedback from customers, like observing customers in the remote setup? Oh my God, it's so tricky because you can't just go over to the person and just sit next to them and just see what they do. You have to find ways. So the other thing, I'm happy this thing happened now, not 10 years ago. The tooling we have, I think it creates maybe a bit of a feeling we're more agile because we have the Miro boards, we have the Slack, we have the Zooms, we have all of the, if like 5 years ago, 10 years ago, it was impossible, right? I bet I'd ask that question, how would it be like 10 years ago? How would Agile solve what's happening then? If you have only a phone, I'd love to see that. And if you have co-coding tools like PHP Storm, we started using some time ago, introduced a feature where you can code like in a Google Doc. You see what someone else is coding. You can do pair work together. You can see what, like, at the time the code is being created, you can see what's happening. So I mean, it's a huge change. So I think technology is kind of maybe hiding how well the Agile is really a way of working, helping us. It's kind of like a bit of steroids, I'd say, in the process.
You mean, so Michael, are you telling me that if we wait until people have a feeling of getting genuine value from the things that Agile promotes, and if we wait for people to feel like they actually want those things, then they're more able to succeed with them when they actually try? Somebody should have put that in a book like 25 years ago.
Well, in a way, I was in a training Andy had about nearly 10 years ago, and I had this eureka moment, like, maybe you just need to give people a problem to solve, give them the context and a bit of a time constraint, and that's all, right? And then just see what happens and get the feedback from the users when they produce what they believe is the best thing to do next. And that's what I'm living with through the last years.
Ron Jeffrey said if you lock people in a room and tell them they have to ship something in 2 weeks, they'll probably discover extreme programming or something like it.
Yeah, but they have to want to do that. Yeah.
Really,
Yes, locking them in the room, it doesn't make me comfortable, but if they volunteer to be locked in the room, then yes.
That's another thing I think worth to mention about the underlying values and the intrinsic motivators of people that go into a certain setup in a certain kind of culture, and then the thing they're doing is at some step in the life cycle, and it sounds complicated, but in the end, I mean, are the intrinsic motivators, as you, JB, mentioned, like some people want to work on their own? Well, why do we want to force them to collaborate, right?
Exactly.
And the other way around, why do we make people sit alone at home and get a task list every day from their boss if they want to collaborate, right? So
I think, Michael, what you're saying really resonates with me. I mean, it kind of points back to, the Agile principle of start with motivated individuals, right? And if you remove kind of the pressure of context, you have to be sat at a desk in an office, or you have to be, sat at home in your home office, and let people actually choose for themselves. I think that goes a long way. It also makes me think of places in general, because what's happened with my company is we used to have an office. We went into lockdown. The lease for the office expired while we were in lockdown, and we decided not to renew and instead to go to a co-working space. So now we're leasing a co-working space at half the capacity of the number of people who are located here. So that means we can never all be in the office at the same time. And just anecdotally, I think it was last week, I went into the office for the first time, maybe in the last 3 or 4 months. And I was exhausted at the end of that day. And it's not that, I had a lot of work to do, but it was just like the physical proximity to people and seeing people for the first time in months, and the long conversations and impromptu conversations that we had. And actually that was really good work. And I'm calling that work because it's a different kind of work, right? It's relationship work. It's like strengthening those relationships. And I have a guy I'm coaching right now, and he was kind of telling me the same thing, that, he's really efficient and he gets everything done on his to-do list every day. Like he's maximized every single minute of his day. And then he went into the office last week and he got nothing done, but he had a bunch of really wonderful conversations. And so it makes me think that maybe this idea of the office and the idea of the office is it's a place where a certain kind of work gets done. And then your home is another place where a certain kind of work gets done. And so instead of like thinking one or the other, let's think about what we do and where's the best place to do it. and if we do it solo or if it requires a group of people, and be flexy like that. So yeah, I really like thinking about places in that respect.
Okay, so technology helps definitely. For example, you have to look it up to realize that when the Agile Manifesto was written, Skype didn't even exist. So there was no tech. I mean, there was a weird tool called See You See Me, which kind of worked like Zoom, but it was awkward and only geeks with large internet connections, speedy internet connections could use it. And now we can do it from almost everywhere. Thanks to LTE and 5G and all the wireless technology. So technology helps definitely. But you guys kind of touched the question of motivation, and that's something that I find problematic in many companies, because you are freelancers or you work at startups or small companies. People are usually quite motivated there. You don't go to startup just to have a nice 9-to-5 job. And as a freelancer, you probably love what you do, and you're just turning that into a revenue stream. But when you go into a large bank or a company like that, you find many people who they're not very motivated. And I'm not sure Agile can do much to change it. But the problem is, without motivation, which is like a fuel for Agile, if you use that metaphor, it just doesn't run as good as it does at startups. So has last year changed anything here? Yeah, please, Daniel.
So I'm not sure I agree. So, if we think about motivation, I think Dan Pink, autonomy, mastery, purpose. Primarily, I'm going to give you my tweet-sized definition of Agile. So then at least we've got something that we can all disagree on. So my tweet-sized version of Agile is this: work in small chunks, get feedback, take engineering seriously. Okay, that's basically my, if you boil it all down, and my corollary to this is, if anyone says it's less than that, they don't understand Agile, and if anyone says it's more than that, they're selling you something. Work in small chunks, get feedback, take engineering seriously. So, and one of the brilliant effects of this goes right into like Don Reinertson and flow and all of that. If you work in small chunks and you manage the amount of work you've got in process at any one time, the load on the system, you will get feedback much faster than if you work in big chunks, right? That's an inevitable consequence of batch size. Okay, so we've got this. This is science, right? This is a pretty. I'm fairly confident about that statement. When you have a short lead time to feedback, and by and large you're working on something that people care about, that is enormously motivating. And so when you have a distributed team, or I love the phrase that Jeff Godhel's been using, suddenly distributed. No one chose this, right? When you have a suddenly distributed team, there's a number of ways to keep an eye on them, right? So again, this is a governance piece. What am I spending my money on? How's it going? You can think of it as micromanaging. You can also think of it as those managers are just slightly scared because they've got someone holding them to account. Never attribute to malice what can be explained not by incompetence but by fear, I think, in a lot of cases. So, okay, let's just put ourselves in their shoes for a minute. What about if we say to them, look, follow the work, not the workers, right? Follow the output, not the activity. And so if whatever that team is responsible for, whoever their customer are, whatever needs they're meeting, if they're meeting those needs, if you're seeing the work flowing through the system, the chances are they're doing okay. If JB is goofing off in Mel's team, right? I don't need to be JB's mum. What's going to happen is Mel and JB will figure out how to get that work flowing again, right? However they're working, because they're a team, and that's what teams do. And it may be that JB isn't goofing off. It may be that JB's kid is ill and some other things happened and there's a COVID-related thing and his world's falling apart and he's got a day job, right? And it's really not his priority right now. And Mel is an enormously compassionate soul. And she's like, we've got this, mate. Take the time you need. And guess what? The work carries on flowing because human beings are human beings and they will collaborate, right? So Agile has given us an ability to motivate people by virtue of working in small chunks, getting feedback on those small chunks, and then having a sense of purpose through that. And I think, and that does distribute. That distributes really well. It's all of the presenteeism and the not just agile theatre, but delivery theatre that we suddenly lose, that we're trying to compensate with things.
Okay, so I hear what you're saying, and now I'm just thinking, okay, so who should orchestrate this in a way, right? And I think maybe there is some form of, we could say, the importance of true leadership, of servant leadership, that is enabling the teams to work according to the underlying assumption that if we work in small chunks, we get that feedback. And what was the third thing? Could you repeat that?
Take
Work in
engineering seriously. That's
Take engineering seriously. All right. Yeah.
Don't worry, it's the one that everyone misses.
I didn't want to mix it up.
Yeah.
So if we look at it from a perspective of leadership, and how do we set the stage in a way? How do we influence what's happening and enable people to become a better version of them, and the teams to become a better versions of working together? I think that's where we have a huge change, that suddenly you can't just go like through the office and just tell people what to do. You can't even see what the reaction when you tell them what to do, right? You don't have that interaction. So I think there's a huge change in there, and the concept of that. So if we go to the Lewin's law, where the behavior is the function of the personality and the environment people function in, it has heavily changed, certainly. And how should leaders influence what's happening and mature? It's not a kind of a easy thing to sometimes explain, but if we go from trying to put it into the archetypes of leadership, we could see that function good in an agile setup, that we believe this is the kind of the stories of successful leaders in these setups. I would say that that's one of the things to also take a good look at. So how should we kind of find a path for those leaders? It's not just the teams and some kind of way we, as you mentioned, the illusion of, or the agile theater, you mentioned, JB, earlier today. So I think that's quite an interesting view on when does it work and when can we really live through it? Because you have to allow people to take engineering seriously, right? You have to allow them to make mistakes. You have to give permission to do small chunks, right? It's not, sometimes it sounds normal that, yeah, it makes sense, let's do it, but it's not how life is, right? I don't know, what are your experiences in permitting people to do those three things you mentioned? So doing the small chunks, getting fast feedback, and taking the engineering seriously. Where does it start? Can it be a bottom-up thing, or should it be a little bit orchestrated?
So this goes back to the autonomy with alignment piece. I just want to very quickly say I love the way you kind of unpack that. Then that really helped me. I describe, and this is one of I think one of the kind of breakthrough type things that I do when I'm coaching, particularly organizations rather than individuals, is the idea that managers manage a process. They manage a system of work. They don't manage human beings, right? So a lot of management is presented as a cross between like a policeman and a parent. You know, have you tidied your room? You know, I'm going to hold you to account for this thing. And we tend to, and again, this is all goes back centuries, in fact, certainly many decades. So if you think of it as you're managing a system of work, you're managing a process. And this is what Adrian Cockcroft meant when he talks about like hire smart people and get out of their way. He doesn't mean like hire smart people and go home, hire smart people and be absent. What he means is hire smart people and get the organization out of their way, right? Create an environment in which they can do their best work. And that is very much about thinking about the system of work rather than the individuals in it, and trust the individuals are going to make good choices, right? And give them a definition of what good looks like. The alignment piece is absolutely critical for this, and I could bang on all day about OKRs, and I won't. I'll just mention them as the most powerful alignment tool I've found. But once you have a shared understanding of alignment, and you understand that the manager's role is to create the space around the team for them to execute, then you get that autonomy, you get that drive, and it's really exciting to watch that happen. And then and then guess what? We don't need to police people and micromanage people because everyone is on the same page.
Yeah, that alone might be the most the biggest way in which lightweight approaches in general, whatever we want to call them, have had their moment, is that all of a sudden a bunch of people have gone off stage, as it were, and they don't need to perform anymore. They don't need to worry as much about how they're being perceived. You know, hell is other people doesn't mean other people suck. Hell is other people means I can never get away from how other people perceive me, and that's a part of me. But we have been able to do that to a certain extent, right? People have been able to get out of the spotlight, go home, focus on and really reconnect with what matters to them, and then do the things that are going to be best for what matters to them. And that has meant that in a lot of situations, people have been able to make more affirmative choices to do the things that are important instead of doing things so that they can be seen doing the right thing. And that feeds into that whole people feeling like they have the permission to actually do one of the things. You know, one of the 12 principles is essentially figure out what you shouldn't be doing and then, you know, stop doing it. I don't think any of us in our careers have ever been in a better position to actually figure out what doesn't need doing and then stop doing it, because nobody sees us not doing it anymore, right? That's been a huge, huge improvement. And like I said earlier, one of the two big consequences of that have been the people who actually don't want to work in a lightweight way aren't forced to pretend that they're doing it. And the ones who really do truly value working in a lightweight way now have more of an opportunity to do it. And that's what leads to stories, I think, like the one that Mel told about starting to see the office as a place where you build meaningful relationships that help us work better together, for those of us who actually care about working better together, rather than a place where people get to see what we're doing and therefore we have to be different people than we want to be. We have to work differently than we want to work, than we need to work. And so much of that performative feeling has gone away for so many of us. It's entirely possible that for many people, this is the first time in their career that they've been able to work closely with their values according to their, like, to be congruent at work in the way they actually work. And I'll bet there's a bunch of people who, like, that's one of the things that stopped things like Agile, XP, Scrum, however you want to phrase it, from really taking hold. But I can't be seen doing that stuff. I can't really refuse to write these useless documents. I can't really refuse to go to these useless meetings. I can't really refuse to, you know, I can't really get up and walk out of a meeting when I realize that I'm not providing any value and I'm not getting anything from it. But people can do that now, right? Because it's really easy in the middle of a training class to just turn your video off and then do whatever you want and listen to the training out of the corner of your ear. Or it's really easy to do those things now. And not in a malicious way, but more in a, look, I don't need to be here. You don't need me here. There's no need to pretend anymore. I'm just going to go now. And that really has allowed lightweight approaches to take hold in a way that they couldn't before, because we don't have to perform the way we used to. And that might be the single biggest benefit to all this. That when we actually do get together and can see each other and can see what each other are doing, it's not to micromanage, it's to build relationships that are meaningful, that can actually foster collaboration for those of us who really care about it and really genuinely need it.
Okay, so we are kind of getting close to our time box. So what you just said, JB, is a very good, like, a summary, but maybe other panelists want to add some quick summary, some closing statement. Mel? Michael?
I'm thinking of what I'd like to say. I think if we have the same panel next year, it will be interesting to hear what we're going to talk about. And I really hope that I can figure out the spontaneity thing. You know, everything over video right now has to be super intentional. I have to intentionally, you know, click to set up a Google Meet or open a Slack chat or whatever. And I have to think about what I want to say more than if I was, maybe that's good. Maybe that's good. So I think my closing statement is, let's stay tuned until next year and see how we progress with it, because I think we still have a lot to learn.
And we are not done with the change. We are
not done with the change. You're absolutely right. I think, you know, maybe like one area that I'd love to hear more from Michael about, but we're out of time, is, you know, what do you do if you're at the outset, you never meet the people to begin with? You know, like companies that are hiring lots of people now, and how do they get onboarding right? How do you build a team when everyone starts remote, that they're not actually co-located? And I'd love to get into that topic more.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's what we have been saying, that at most companies, teams that were teams before COVID, they are doing okay in remote, but teams that were created struggle, that were created later. They do struggle to some degree. Michael?
If the question was like, did Agile prove? I think it did for the companies that really had a good laid out foundation of the values they base the practices on. And the leaders are really, truly servant leaders. So they think day and night, how can I enable my teams and my people to become the better version of themselves? And I think I see that happening, and I see teams fall apart if that is the contrary. So there are no values, just Scrum police and people who just have a P&L for the end of the quarter to fix. So I think that could be a road sign for some to think of.
Hey, Dan?
A couple of things. You know, we've been talking about this as this kind of this sudden wrench, and that we're not in the office. That is very much an away from kind of framing. And what we didn't touch on, of course, we run out of time, is the towards framing. What new ways of working does this create? Does this encourage? And something that JB said suddenly triggered for me. You know, there's typically 3 or 4 meetings going on that you like to be in, right? But, you know, maybe, again, the serendipitous eavesdropping thing where you go, oh, I was waiting for that to come up because I've got this opinion, or, you know, I want to connect you up with Mel or something because she's got this opinion. But I don't want to spend an hour of my life in this meeting waiting for that one, you know, that one opportunity. And so, you know, this allows me to be in half a dozen meetings, knowing that I'm doing exactly what JB is saying. I'm doing my day job, right? And I'm over here and I'm waiting, and I don't need to be actively listening. My brain will tell me, right? In the same way that serendipity just happens, my brain will say, oh, it's that thing. And you go, right, tune in. Okay, yes, I can dip in for 5 minutes, dip out again. So I'm not kind of taking over the meeting for them. And also I'm not stuck in it. And so I think there's a whole ways of working that we haven't really given ourselves the chance to explore yet, because we've been desperately trying to recreate the physical co-located work thing. Like Zoom, you know, Zoom and Teams and all these things are platforms for products that haven't been invented yet. And we're using the platform. You know, there's a whole bunch of very opinionated vertical products that don't exist yet. Because I think where we'll be in a year's time, and like we're all trying to do a conference on some combination of Zoom and a bunch of web things and Slack, right? But that seems really ad hoc. So I think that's going to go somewhere interesting.
Hey, maybe we'll find out eventually, because you mentioned that Scrum and all the XP, all those methods that we know, they have started in mid-90s, let's say, but very few people knew about it. So maybe we don't know. Maybe there are teams already finding those new ways, but they haven't shared with us yet. We don't know yet that they are doing it. So yeah, the future will be interesting. Unfortunately, there's no more future for this panel. We ended. We arrived at our time box. So I want to thank you so much for the discussion. It flowed so nicely that it wasn't even needed for the most part. So that was great. And our conference is also coming to an end. There are two things left. There will be a few words from the organizers just in a second, and then we will have Jeff Leiker for the closing keynote. Now, thank you guys. And I will pass on to Piotr Burdyło for the closing remarks from the organizers. Thank you again.